Well, welcome and good morning to you. And we are coming to you on a very crazy week. The weather has done some really strange things to our ability to meet in person, but we wanted to share with you and connect with you online. So thank you for joining us. And I'm here today with Pastor Katie, who is going to share with us some things about how hope starts here in some very specific ways, some very helpful ways. So, yeah, thank you, Pastor Katie.
Great. Well, thank you. We've been saying this season, hope starts here.
Yeah.
And today we want to talk a little bit about how we have hope in our purpose. And I think whether we say it out loud or not, like a lot of us are wondering, does my life have a purpose? Is what I'm doing significant? Is there any meaning to this? What is my purpose?
Yeah, I'm reminded of a conversation I had very recently with an old friend of mine. I bumped into him in the marketplace, and he shared with me the sad news that his wife of many, many years had passed away a couple years ago, and his kids are out of the house. And I could just see in his eyes and hear as he talked about just realizing like he didn't have anything to get up for. He didn't have anything to commit his life to at this point. He was just looking for it to end. And I thought, wow, that's a there he's probably not alone.
Yeah, probably. And that's really sad.
Yeah.
And I think that part of maybe the problem that we've run into is that we hear these messages all the time that, your purpose is kind of tied to your ability to, succeed, to have success, to take care of your family, to have to good health, take care of your body. Maybe it's tied to your children or your relationships. And those are all good things. But I think they're very fragile to hold the weight of like your life's purpose
Yeah.
or your identity.
Yeah.
And so when life changes, like when things shift, because life is always changing and things are shifting that we have no control over, then we're left with this, hopeless kind of feeling of I'm alone, I'm anxious, I'm scared. I don't know if my life has meaning or purpose, and that's a really dark place to be.
Yeah.
And so I think today I kind of want to reframe that a little bit by saying that purpose and really that hope in our purpose isn't something that we can attain by striving after or working hard to find, but really we discover purpose by first enjoying God's presence and then kind of living out of that to be a blessing wherever we go. And we look back at Abram, who was later renamed Abraham, back in the book of Genesis. And God calls Abram to leave his land, to come follow him. And he says to him that he's going to bless him. God is going to bless Abram. And then Abram's family is going to be a blessing to all nations. Yeah. And I think the order of that matters because God blessed Abram before Abram had, he hadn't really accomplished anything. It doesn't say that he had done anything spectacular or really anything that would make him a blessing to all nations at this point. But God blesses him first, and then his purpose kind of flows out of that blessing. And it's interesting to follow that promise, throughout Scripture, and how that promise that Abram's family is going to be a blessing to all nations finds its fulfillment in Jesus, who was part of Abram's family.
Okay.
And came God incarnate to earth to bring people back, all people, back into God's blessing, God's shalom, how God wanted things to be from the beginning. And so that as we experience God's blessings, we can be blessing to the world. And I think a really interesting place that this same idea shows up is at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry. He's been baptized, and before he heals anybody, he teaches anybody, he really accomplishes anything in his ministry or his mission, God says, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased."
Yeah, I love that.
So God blesses first, right? Before Jesus had accomplished anything. So Jesus is able to live his purpose from this place of belovedness and blessing, not, striving or trying to accomplish or all these things that we tend to try to do. Yeah. And I think because Jesus has done this for us, that we are able to live that way too. And I really like this summary from the Westminster Catechism,
Okay.
which is basically teaching people what it was to follow Jesus, saying that the purpose or the chief end of humanity is to glorify God and to enjoy God's presence forever. So our purpose is not something that we achieve, but it's really someone who we get to enjoy.
Wow. I really like, can you say that again? Just,
Yeah. Our purpose is not something that we achieve, but someone that we get to enjoy.
yeah, that's a real huge paradigm shift. And I'm curious, Katie, this isn't just an academic, intellectual conversation for you, right? Some of this comes out of your own story. So maybe share a little bit about what kind of how that played into this for you.
Sure. So there was a time in my life where I really kind of felt like I had lost sight of my purpose. And it wasn't anything, drastic or dramatic. Like I was going through my days, I was being responsible, I was taking care of my family, doing all the right things. But it really felt like I was slowly kind of maybe falling asleep. So I, at some point, look around my life and say, what am I doing? Like there has to be something more. I feel like I'm barely surviving, not thriving, and just kind of this hopeless feeling. And what brought me back to life wasn't that I discovered this plan of, these are the 5 steps you need to take to find your purpose and be productive in life, but it was being awakened to God's presence. And the first thing that really helped me was the practice of gratitude. Just being intentional every day to look for and name all of the seemingly small, mundane gifts. So like the soap bubbles, how they can get like little rainbows on them?
Yeah.
So like the beauty of a soap bubble when you're washing the dishes, or like waking up early before the sun is even up and the birds are singing. The feel of the sun on my face, baby's laughter, just these ordinary everyday miracles. And as I became like aware and just hunting them down every day, joy started to grow in me, which was kind of a new thing. I felt life return, and it was like I experienced this like hunger for more of God's presence, more of this joy in God's gifts. And so I started memorizing scripture. And the scriptures that I was memorizing, they were telling me things like who I was, that I was loved, that I belonged, that God created me. Tell me about who God was, that God is faithful and good. And so these messages kind of seeped into my soul to become part of who I was. And I would go for walks, my normal walk around the neighborhood, and I would just recite the verses to myself, or trying to sleep at night, I would recite the verses to myself, and those became kind of a prayer. So even as I was on my walk, I would recite the verses, and then I would pray for my family and pray for my children. We did a lot of praying through the Lord's Prayer, that God's will would be done. And it was like I slowly started coming back to life. It was like I wasn't empty anymore, but I was being filled. And I remember saying to someone, it may have even been you, like this was years ago, that I feel like I'm more alive than I've ever been before.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was like this waking up. And it's interesting because I hadn't like discovered my purpose. My circumstances hadn't really changed. But it didn't matter. I had found the ability, or awakened to the ability, to enjoy God's presence. And that was enough.
Wow. Yeah. So were you aware of that connection to your purpose at that point?
Not really, I don't think. I think it was more something that I was doing and experiencing. I was aware that I feel better, that my life has more joy. I don't feel empty and lost. But that wasn't the end of the journey. So I got involved with community more as part of this process. I joined a small group. I made more friends in the community. I was making myself more known, I suppose. And those people who knew me were able to start saying, hey, I see gifts in you. Things that maybe I hadn't
Okay.
seen in myself, or, hey, you're really good at such and such, or maybe you should, start thinking about a leadership position, leading a small group. And so all these things were really new to me, but that was the role that community was playing in that. And I remember I had another practice that was really important at that stage of discerning what is the next step. What is kind of, as I'm enjoying God's presence, how do I now use these gifts that people are telling me that I have, kind of to take that next step in my journey? And I was doing a lot of Lectio Divina, which is a sacred reading of Scripture, kind of praying through the passages, listening, what is God speaking to me? And over, what I was hearing is God was calling me into pastoral ministry, which I was like, I don't think I want to do that for all kinds of reasons. The ways I had been grown up and the experiences I had of women being in ministry, like there was all kinds of layers there. But when I finally said, okay, fine, I accept that this is my call. And I went to one of my mentors, who she had been involved in my life for many years at this point. And I told her, I think God's calling me into pastoral ministry. And she says, well, it's about time. Because for years, she had been seeing these gifts in me and telling me, I think this is, you're gifted in these areas. I think this is something you could do. But to hear me say, yes, God is calling me. So the affirmation of community, of like our purpose isn't something that we discover alone by ourselves somewhere, but that really is kind of discovered and found in the middle of a community where we can discern together. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, that really played out well and powerfully in your case, right? So there's different practices. You talked about gratitude, you talked about Lectio Divina, you talked about scripture reading, you talked about community. I mean, those are some, that's a lot of different ways, I think, to move forward with
They
this.
are, and I think those were ways that worked for me, right? They fit into my routine. And it wasn't like gratitude was adding something else to my life, but like helping me become aware of what was already there. And I was able to weave in the prayer and the scripture memorization into my regular life. And I think there's all kinds of practices, and I love to hear how they connect with God's presence and how, different things that work for people's lives, because it's not going to look like me, everybody. But these are just some of the practices that were helpful for me. And I think that we live in this world that's really busy.
I was going to say, some of those things can feel, I think anybody who's watching this might be thinking, I don't have time to add more stuff to my life.
Exactly, because we're racing from one thing to the next. Me too, by the way. Like it's wild, right? And then I think sometimes we finally get a break or a breather, and we say, okay, I'm exhausted. I just want to turn my brain off. We scroll, we distract ourselves, we binge watch, whatever it is. And I don't think those things are necessarily bad. But we have to remember that the habits, the things that we're doing day after day they're actually shaping us to be a certain kind of person. And so if we want to live with this deep purpose of really, I think, being with Jesus so that we can live and love like Jesus, that we have to be purposeful, to use that word, in how we use our time and where we're putting our attention. But it's not about, adding like more things to my to-do list. It's about making space to be with God and enjoy God's presence.
Kind of like my purpose isn't necessarily primarily to do more and more things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But to create the space to find that joy in just being with Jesus.
And then like more things happen in that space. I mean, your life is an example of that. Here you are leading, pastoring, and doing things but that you didn't start out
I
to
never
do
knew.
that.
Exactly. And I think that drove my husband crazy because he wanted me to have a 5-year plan. And I didn't
Okay.
have a 5-year plan. I literally said, well, God has called me to this one step.
Yeah.
And then, there was a next step. And I know, because, sometimes our purpose can change. We're always called to enjoy God's presence, but sometimes the way that looks changes in our different seasons of life.
Yeah.
And so I know God has been faithful to lead me one step at a time, that when it's time for the next step,
Yeah.
God will show me.
Yeah.
So if you're watching this and maybe you're wondering, like, I'm afraid I've missed my purpose or I've lost my purpose, I just want to say that there's some hope. I don't think your purpose is ever lost. It begins again every single time that you return to God's presence. Hope starts here, not in doing more or adding more to our list, but enjoying God's presence and being so filled with God's blessings and love that we can't help but overflow with that blessing to those around us.
Yeah.
So we find our purpose not by striving, but by enjoying God's presence and allowing God to use us to bless others.
Wow. That's some really powerful truth, Katie. And so thank you for sharing that. Thank you for dialing in, tuning in with us. And maybe, we talked at the beginning about so many folks are really stuck in this place, maybe feeling empty, kind of on, you even talked about kind of feeling like I'm just going to sleep in life, right? So if you're in that kind of place, or if you've got some other struggles or challenges, we would love to be able to pray with you and help you. You're able to just text the word prayer to 301-900-2920. That's 301-900-2920. Just text the word prayer, and we would love to connect with you and pray with you if you need some help with that. Also, in the coming weeks, after the snow clears, we'll continue in this series called Whole Again. How do we find hope in the many different places that we find ourselves? And you're watching this on our YouTube channel. If you haven't liked and subscribed, please do that. It helps us reach more people and take messages like this and so many others into places where people can really benefit from connecting with Jesus and what he's doing in our world and in our community. So thank you so much for joining us. And don't do too much shoveling.
Yeah, stay warm and safe.
Stay warm and safe. And we look forward to seeing many of you in person in the coming weeks.
So I'm Josh Olson. We recently started attending Seneca Creek not too long ago, and I also recently started a position here as the facility manager for the church. This is my wife.
I'm Tara Olson, and we're here to talk about our upcoming trip to Nicaragua, partnering with Hope Project International. This is a mission trip where we will be building homes for people that don't really have any homes right now. And so we're inviting you to join the trip with us if you're interested.
So we first got involved with this mission organization at a previous church we were attending. I went on a missions trip with them, and Hope Project International. They go to a variety of countries around the world, but this trip that I joined went to Nicaragua, and I've gone back with them now a couple more times to Nicaragua. And this last time, because it's just been so powerful for me, I felt it important to bring along my wife and our two oldest sons.
I think the biggest thing is seeing God working through the hands and feet of the missionaries that lead Hope Project International, Dan and Megan, as well as the pastors that lead the churches in these communities. In the United States, it can feel really difficult to see God sometimes, and in the current climate of the United States, it doesn't always feel like he's present. But when we're there and we're working, we're not thinking about any of those things. We're just doing God's work. And these people have nothing, and they've been praying for homes for years. And this is a very tangible way to provide them with that. And so when you go on this trip, when you do this work, you will encounter God in ways you've never encountered before.
Yeah, and I think another thing that keeps me engaged is I really appreciate there's an intentional design to the way these trips are organized and managed by Hope Project International. Than and Megan have been doing this for many years now, and they've kind of got it down to a very good process to basically anybody can come, you have no experience, and they pull this group of people who are not necessarily construction workers together, and we're able to build 3 houses in 3 days, and that to me is amazing how they do that. But you know every I've seen people from like the age of in their 80s, which they really don't want to do that again. But we've had anybody
Certainly
from
in
the
their
age,
60s.
age of 80 all the way down to the age of 10 that were able to come and participate. And I just think that the intentionality behind the way they run the trip, it's amazing how they can bring so many varied people from all types of walks of life together in order to achieve the objectives of the mission trip.
I think we just want to share our experience with members of Seneca Creek. We initially started this trip just as a friends and family trip with people we knew that wanted to go. And we felt really called to share this with the Seneca Creek community and to be able to invite others into this experience, to grow with members of our church, and to get to know people better and to share this experience that we've loved having.
Yeah, and I think another thing that's really awesome this year is the Hope Project organization got a donation from another church in the United States, where they have a bunch of homes where the materials are already purchased, right? They're already paid for by this other church, and so the Hope Project kind of, when we were talking to them about doing our family and friends trip, they mentioned we just need people to come build these things, right? So that's where we started to connect the dots of we can bring a crew of people of just our family and friends, but we'd love to bring another 1 or 2 crews here of church members if people are available to join us. If anybody's interested from what you've heard in joining us on going down to Nicaragua with Hope Project International, we're going to be having some informational meetings coming up. And Tara, do you have the dates and the times for those?
Yeah, so we have 2 informational meetings, one on Friday, February 13th at 6 p.m., and the second one on February 15th, right after the second service.